Hey everybody, this is Pastor Matthew Best from St. Stephen Lutheran Church in New Kingstown. You can find us on the web at www.ststephenlc.org. That's STSTEPHENLC.org. Find us on Facebook also. Just look for St. Stephen Evangelical Lutheran Church, New Kingstown. And today is Tough Topic Tuesday. And so this is where I take a topic that's really difficult, that oftentimes we want to ignore, we don't want to talk about, and I talk about it because it's healthy to talk about things, especially really difficult topics. And so today the topic is homelessness. It's a topic that we'd really probably rather not talk about, but the problem is it exists, and so we should talk about it. By not talking about something doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. If we have the ability to kind of ignore things, then we have a privilege in that area. Doesn't mean we're bad people. It just means that we think that it doesn't affect us. Reality is that oftentimes these things do affect us, whether directly or indirectly. Homelessness is one of those things that we may think, well, we're not homeless, or we may not know somebody who's homeless, and so it doesn't affect us. Reality is far more complex than that, because if you use the medical system, then you're impacted by homelessness. People who are experiencing homelessness don't have oftentimes primary care medical personnel, and so when they have a situation, they'll use the emergency room of the hospital and for things that aren't really emergencies. And that increases the cost of everything. Guess who pays for that? You do. So there's lots of things like that. But the biggest thing I want to talk about is some perceptions about it. Homelessness is one of those things where you can't just point to one thing and say, here's the problem. And if we just did this one thing, the whole thing would be taken care of. It's much more complicated. People are messy, right? And I don't mean that in a literal physical space type of way, but people's lives are messy. And that's true whether we're talking about someone who's experiencing homelessness or somebody who's not. People's lives are messy. All of our lives are messy in some way, shape, or form. I guarantee it. My life is messy in certain aspects, right? Not in maybe the same aspects as you or in someone who is experiencing homelessness, but there's a part of me that is a mess. And I'm sure that's probably the case for you. We may have the ability to hide it. We may have resources to cover it up. We may have coping abilities, whatever. We may be able to better deal with some things as well. Different people have different coping abilities as well. But there's some area of each of our lives that is a mess. I'm pretty willing to say that. So what is homelessness? Well, it depends on who you ask. Surprisingly, we may think it's a simple definition, but it's not. Even our federal government doesn't have an agreement on what homelessness is defined as. The Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, has one definition of homelessness. The Department of Education has a second definition of homelessness, and they do not match up. There's some overlap, but they do not match up. Now, think about that for a moment, that you have one government, and it has two different definitions of homelessness. Let me ask you, what kind of problems do you think that creates? We've got certain people who can receive certain services from one department, but not from another, because they don't fit the definition. That creates some problems. It's confusion, for one thing. Why do we have multiple definitions for the same thing? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So then there's perceptions that we're dealing with, right? There's a lot of perceptions that somebody who is experiencing homelessness is dangerous, or they're on drugs, or they have mental illness, or they're lazy, or whatever. Pick all those things out. So I'm going to tell you that some of those may be true. They may. There are people that probably fit into those categories. But I'm also going to tell you that in a lot of cases, those are not true as well. there are people who experience homelessness and fall into homelessness for no fault of their own. And that's not an exception, unfortunately. There are systems in place. And I know a lot of people don't like to talk about systems and all this type of stuff, but this is the reality. There are systems in place in which it doesn't matter how hard you try. There are some ways that you're just going to get screwed over. This gets into the complication when we're talking about homelessness. There is not a nice, simple reason why someone falls into homelessness. And there's not a nice, simple solution to get someone out of homelessness. Usually, if someone is experiencing homelessness, they're also dealing with hunger. They have transportation issues. They have health issues. They probably have work-related issues. There may be mental health issues. There's probably some kind of social interaction issue and a number of other things. There's monetary, economic issues. There may be emotional challenges that happen. There may be chronic illness situations. There may be dealing with the justice system. There may be dealing with some kind of addiction. There may be dealing with some kind of injustice that's going on. It could deal with immigration status. Could be a combination of all of that. It could be something completely different. And so when we're talking about homelessness, we need to be really careful that we're not just trying to pinpoint one specific thing and think, oh, if we just deal with this one thing, then it all gets taken care of. If it were that easy, we wouldn't have anyone who's homeless. That's the reality of it. We've talked with and met with a lot of folks over time who have some very interesting stories. And I remember a father and a son who fell into homelessness because there was a health problem. They had been doing great, lived in this beautiful house, working on race cars, designing and repairing and doing all this stuff, had plenty of money, lots of money. And then all of a sudden, a health incident happened with the father. And as a result of this health incident, couldn't work anymore. Things started piling up. Bills started piling up. Couldn't pay them. If you have no income, all of a sudden you start going through money. And you got to keep paying those bills. And eventually you end up losing the house. You losing the car. He lost his wife who left. Still had a health problem. Still couldn't work. Ended up being homeless. Was it because he was lazy? No, he wanted to work, but he couldn't. Was it because he didn't take care of himself? No, there was something happened. Did he have mental health issues? Nope, didn't have any mental health issues that we were aware of. Did he have emotional issues and social issues? Nothing that was really a driving force for anything like that. Something happened to him that was out of his control, and it screwed him over. That's what happens. That's what happens to a lot of folks, unfortunately. So that's kind of just scratching the surface of what homelessness is. There's lots of programs out there that try to help folks who are in homelessness, and I encourage you can just do some searches for that. There are emergency shelters that do some great work. There are food pantries that also work with folks. There are programs in different parts of the country that try to get people into temporary housing to get them transferred into more permanent housing. There are places, things like tiny home villages that are popping up to help people in those type of situations and really connect them with other services as well that they need. There's other programs, especially in this area, that deal with longer-term housing and affordability in housing as well. That's a challenge that also goes along with homelessness. Is if there's a lack of affordable housing, how are you going to do that? One of the other things that is currently an issue in the midst of a pandemic has to do with evictions. The governor has extended the evictions moratorium until the middle end of August. And what that does is it allows for more people to not be homeless. And we already have an issue with homelessness. And if evictions were allowed to proceed, there would be a whole lot more folks. And the system is already stressed. Whether we're talking about government assistance or private assistance from churches and individuals and those type of things. Churches and individuals cannot take on a tsunami of homelessness. It's just not even practical. We don't have the resources. We don't have the knowledge, the specialization to be able to actually do more than put a Band-Aid on people's situations, and that's not helping them long term ultimately. One of the things I did want to highlight is an event that's coming up next Monday. It's called Sleep Out in the Park. Real catchy name there, right? There's a few of us who are going to be literally sleeping out in a park. We will have masks. We'll be social distancing, just a handful of us. It's going to be a mostly virtual event. You can find information about this. There's a Facebook event page on this. Just search for Sleep Out in the Park. And it will be for, when is it? July 20th into the 21st. And it's going to start in the evening. And we're going to be live streaming. And the idea is not to sit there and watch us sit out in the park. That would be boring. No, instead what we're going to do is we're going to have some interviews, a variety of interviews. Every half hour, we're going to be interviewing a variety of different folks, people who have an understanding and have dedicated their lives to trying to overcome homelessness. We have an interview with somebody who has experienced homelessness. We have interviews with folks who provide social services. We have interviews with religious figures. We have an interview with the person who has founded the idea of housing first as a way to overcome homelessness. We have folks that are going to be talking with us about the eviction moratorium. You name it, there is a variety of folks, both going to be live interviews, mostly through Zoom, but also pre-recorded ones for folks who weren't able to fit into the time frame. The interviews are going to start probably a little bit after 5 o'clock. You can go on to the Facebook event page and find out a little more information. We're not looking to raise money or anything like that, but we are looking to highlight folks who are doing what they can in the midst of this pandemic to show that we have a homeless problem in our nation, but specifically in this region. And these are the folks who are trying to do something about it. And we're asking people to support those organizations, those agencies, to give them an opportunity to showcase what they do. So I invite you to go onto that page and to follow it and to share it. I'd ask you to please share that information, and it'll be a great event. So that's our Tough Topic Tuesday, really just scratching the surface, barely touching the issue. But it's something I think that we need to talk about because it's something that affects us. All right, I hope you have a blessed week. We'll talk to you later. Bye.